Here at BBC Radio London, let's get a view on this. Jonathan Davis is someone we've had numerous times on this show in the past, but that's all right. He's an economist and he's a wealth advisor, and we thought we'd get him on to get his reaction to today's budget. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Duncan.
Good evening, sir. What did you make of it all?
Oh, it was the annual party political broadcast, whichever party's in power. The great economist and philosopher Dr. Thomas Sowell, he said, no one will really understand politics. It's difficult to read it, it's such small. Until they understand that politicians are not trying to solve our problems, they're trying to solve their own problems, of which getting elected and re-elected are problems number one and number two. That's their job. There was nothing in that budget which changes anything that's been going on since 2008, the great crash, which Gordon Brown said he saved the world. Utter nonsense. We are, in fact, in an economic depression as defined by John Maynard Keynes as an extended period of slow or no growth. And indeed, Hammond told us that economic growth this year will be 1.5% compared to 2% that they said at the beginning of the year, and we're going down to 1.3% only in a couple of years' time. We are in a long-term economic depression because of the policies of successive governments since 2008 and the Bank of England.
So you're not surprised when we heard the forecast today, the downgrades, if you like, in terms of economic growth. None of that came as a surprise to you?
Well, it's not as simple as that. As it happens, the rest of the world is moving along quite nicely. We are a globalist economy, thank goodness. I hope we don't go protectionist in the future. So you'd expect that we would continue to do what the rest of the world is doing. But it just shows you the absolute dire state of the economy in the UK, that we're not keeping up with the rest of the world.
Some of the announcements that were outlined today by Philip Hammond, let me just go through a few of them actually, just to get your reaction. I mean, the freezing of alcohol duty, apart from an increase in duty on high-strength white ciders, presumably that's a kind of like, look, we're quite a nice party, we understand you still like a pint of beer and a glass of wine, so we're not going to put the price up.
Well, I would say the whole budget was actually, please love us, we're really nice people. This was a budget which is very interesting in the sense that it's 4.5 years until the next general election. Yeah. And this was a budget where the guy was just throwing money at everything. I mean, John McDonnell practically could have given this budget. I said about party political broadcast, as far as I'm concerned, this was archetypal. This was Philip Hammond and Theresa May trying to keep their jobs, because if you'll recall, just after the general election, there were lots of Tory backbenchers who wanted May out. So that's what I think this budget was all about.
What could have been said or outlined today by the Chancellor, in your view, in terms of what maybe could be done to perhaps give the economy a boost? What would you like to have heard?
Well, I think it's important that we understand what you mean by giving the economy a boost.
Well, your definition.
Well, the thing is, that's what the politicians, Gordon Brown, David Cameron and George Osborne, Theresa May and Hammond today, that's what they've been trying to do since 2008, the great financial crash.
Yeah, but we like having you on this show, Jonathan, because you're a radical. You're like a radical economist. I'm keen to find out from you, and people listening also to BBC Radio London, I suspect, would like to hear what you think should have been said.
Well, indeed. But just finish the point. So what they've been doing is pumping vast amounts of money into the system, and ultimately all it's got us, clearly, is 1 or 2% per annum growth. And I can tell you that the stats are that the bulk of that growth even is going to the top 10%. So what we need, And, you'll never hear this anywhere else unless you go to free market capitalist economists like me. What we need is to move away from massive stimulus and intervention, and we need to let the economy do its thing. And that means, in the short term, we would have an economic bust. But in the long term, we would have economic prosperity. What we have now is a long-term economic depression with slow or no growth. And it's going to get worse and worse the further we go down this route of just continuing to borrow money hand over fist and paying interest on it. We need to reverse those policies. For example, we need to spend less. We need to borrow less. And something else which you'll never hear, we need to get rid of this Marxist policy, help to buy. Lending, the state lending money to people to buy a house, all it does is keep house prices high. What the economy needs is that house prices fall, and if he wants to help the first-time buyers and the under 35s that they talk so much about, they shouldn't be slashing stamp duty, although it's a nonsense tax anyway. They should be ending help to buy. That's the way we'll get reduced house prices, and that's the way you'll get long-term economic prosperity.
And presumably building more houses.
They can build more houses if they want, but, you talk to 100 economists and pundits, 99 out of 100 will tell you, if you build more houses, it will bring house prices down, it will bring rents down, and that will help the under 35s and so on. Yeah. Absolute utter nonsense. The reality is that nowhere in history, at no time in history, has large-scale building brought down house prices. I can give you example after example where you've had large-scale house building and it hasn't affected house prices. It's a myth which is unfortunately never talked about. The reason why house prices are still high is because in 2013 his predecessor brought out Help to Buy, and that got lending going again, and therefore people took it up, and that's what kept house prices high. So yes, you can build more houses if there's a need, but I'll tell you and your listeners, end Help to Buy, and you'll see the 600,000 empty homes in England and Wales, many of them coming on the market. Suddenly, there'll be no shortage.
Those empty homes are presumably owned by other people, yeah?
Yes.
So walk my listeners through and walk me through your thinking again. I'm only focusing on this, Jonathan, because whenever we talk about the housing shortage or the housing crisis, yep. I take caller after caller, and they basically articulate the view that you've slagged off, which is we need to build more houses. It's quite simple. They see that as a solution. They talk about demand and supply, etc., etc. So just walk us through your thinking again as to why the idea to scrap Help to Buy is the solution as opposed to building more properties.
Well, let me just put to bed, if I can, this myth that if you build more houses, you'll suddenly get reduced house prices. Now, you'd think, logically, supply and demand, you produce more supply. If there's the same level of demand, prices will fall. The thing is, they've built 200-odd thousand homes a year. Have you seen house prices fall? No, because lending has got going again, as I say, in 2013 because of Help to Buy. It's lending from the state. In 2012, do you know, national house prices rose 0%. And think about that, Duncan. That was with the lowest borrowing costs, literally, in human history. And yet, house prices weren't rising at all in 2012. So they created Help to Buy, which was where the government lends, the state lends 20 or 40% in London, and then the building societies only therefore have to lend 55 or 75%. And the reason why house prices didn't rise in 2012, because they were about to fall off a cliff, because the banks and building societies were terrified of that, so they stopped lending. That's why they brought in Help to Buy. I can give you, for example, Ireland, Spain, they had huge house building up until 2008. You didn't see house prices fall. Indeed, Spain, in the year 2006, at 45 million population, they built as many homes as, get this, France, Italy, and the Netherlands combined. But house prices didn't fall until you got the credit crunch, until lending slowed, stopped dead in 2008. And because lending has been flowing for the last few years, house prices are rising again. Then you look at Canada, Australia, the UK, indeed, China, relatively large-scale house building, massive house building in China. House prices don't fall because you've got easy lending. And the reason why caller after caller, as you say, calls in and say we need more house building is because that's what they're told to believe by the powers that be. I am telling you the facts. Unfortunately, I am one of very few economists who sees it that way.
Well, I'm happy to give you the airtime to put that issue up for debate. A final question about today's budget. This support for electric cars, including a £400 million charging infrastructure fund.
Yep.
You started off our discussion tonight by saying this was a kind of budget which most political parties do, which essentially is love us, etc. Whenever I take calls about electric cars or indeed driverless cars, none of my audience are remotely interested. What do you think the thinking is behind this 400 million quid pledge?
Yep. They'll have, your callers will have to get interested. Within 5 years, there will be driverless cars on British roads. The numbers of electric cars sold is rising, depending upon what developed country we look at, 30 to 50% a year. Now, okay, it's from incredibly tiny numbers, but you only need a few years of that kind of growth, and then you have a relatively significant part of the car market is electric. Indeed, by 2015, it is widely accepted in this field that 85% of new cars will be electric. So people better get used to it. It's as simple as that. And one of the reasons why it's still tiny sales in the UK is because it's practically impossible to find somewhere to charge your car. I think it's absolutely spot on that they're going to build charging stations up and down the country.
And a final but related question, what we heard today about diesel vehicles, and the older your diesel car, they're going to exempt vans and commercial vehicles, but the older your diesel car, you're going to end up paying more tax to have that car on the road. Do you think that is a fair measure to announce?
No, I think it's disgusting. It's pure tax raising, particularly in London. I hear even if you park a car, you have to pay more than the standard car parking charge. The diesel is reasonably green, or the fumes coming out are not nearly as bad as they were, say, 30 years ago. It's purely a tax-raising measure, and it's just nasty. It's just socialism.
I appreciate your time, Jonathan. Thank you. That's Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth advisor. We wanted to get him on BBC Radio London tonight to give us, I suppose in many ways, a no-holds-barred assessment of today's budget.